Welcome back to the channel. This time I have 10 things that you absolutely need to, want to, gotta know if you're trying to choose between buying a food and beverage franchise or a services franchise. Now, if you've watched any of the videos on my channel, you know I skew heavily toward the services, but I've been doing this long enough and I've worked with enough clients to understand that there are plenty of talented, motivated, ambitious people out there who are looking at franchises and they struggle to make that choice. And it makes sense. There are over 3,000 franchises in this country, and food and beverage is the biggest segment in all of franchising. It's been that way forever. Now, these 10 things, these 10 tips, they'll help you in two ways. Number one, they'll help you if you're trying to choose between two specific franchises, for example. You might have a food and beverage franchise you're looking at. You might have a service franchise you're looking at. If you use these tips, it'll help you make an informed decision between those two franchises. But where the real value in these 10 tips comes in is saving you time. If you follow these 10 tips, you'll know exactly how to start your search in services or in food and beverage. So if you apply these 10 tips at the start of your search, it's going to save you plenty of time and help you narrow your focus to a smaller, more manageable set of franchises to look at. Okay, real quick before we get to those 10 things you absolutely need to know, you first have to understand exactly what it is you're buying, whether it is you join a food and beverage franchise or a franchise that provides services. And with food and beverage, it's pretty straightforward. When you join the franchise, you are agreeing to only sell the food and beverage items developed by that franchise. You're also buying their support. Support, for example, in them helping you find the right operating location. You're also buying access to their network of vendors and suppliers so that you can source the food, the beverage items, the napkins, the uniforms, the plastic cutlery, the signage, everything you need to actually run your location. You're also buying their systems for everything from operations to customer service and their methods for preparing and marketing and distributing the food and beverage items to the customer. You are also agreeing to operate from a fixed physical location where your customer is going to walk in off the street and come to you. Now, with services, you're also agreeing. You're agreeing to provide the services developed by the franchise. You're also buying that franchise's industry expertise and their systems for operations and marketing, how to do sales, how to recruit and hire and train employees. You're also buying access to their vendors and suppliers, vehicles, machinery, equipment. Plenty of service franchises need all that to run. You're also agreeing to operate, but in a specific geographic, a defined geographic location. And you generally are going to bring the services to the customer, which is why you usually have more operating flexibility with a service franchise. You might set up your office at home. You might set up shop in a light industrial or light commercial or a warehouse space. You might have a retail location where the customer walks in off the street to you, like with a healthcare or a weight management franchise, but you usually have more choice of where you are going to operate from. Now, you can earn a great living as a franchise owner with a food and beverage business or as a franchisee of a service franchise. But it depends on making the right choice. And that right choice or that choice depends entirely on two things. Number one, understanding exactly what it is you want to get out of the business, how much money you want to make, what kind of hours you want to work, what your role is in the business. And you also need to understand crystal clear what it is you are willing to put up with as a franchise owner and what you are not willing to put up with as a franchise owner. More on that later. But now let's get to the 10 things you absolutely need to know. And because it's a lot, I've divided it up into 3 videos. But let's get to number 1. Okay, the first thing you absolutely need to know is, well, it's you actually. You need to know what you stand to gain from owning a business. You need to know what scares you the most about owning a business, and you need to know what unique skills and abilities that you have that you can lend to running a business. You can get all of that by conducting a personal SWOT analysis. Now, I like to use something called a DOS analysis, and that stands for dangers, opportunities, and strengths. I run them with my clients, and I can do it for you. Now, let me give you a few examples of how this works. So for strengths, are you good at team building, for example? Are you extroverted? Are you strong in sales? Do you have food management experience? Or are you passionate about food? Or maybe you're a project manager type who's really good at keeping the trains running on time. And then do the same thing with the opportunities, what you want to get out of the business. Do you want a business that in 5 or 10 years you can sell for $1 million or $5 million, $10 million or more dollars. Not every type of service or food and beverage franchise will do that. You need to understand which are the food and beverage franchises and which are the service franchises that commonly get listed for those amounts and actually sell for those amounts. Do you want a franchise business that doesn't require any full-time employees? Do you want a business that's going to let you travel more or travel less? Do you want a business that doesn't require any nights and weekends? And then you've got your dangers. Are you terrified by the idea of networking? Are you scared to sign a commercial lease? Are you petrified by the idea of having a large unskilled workforce to rely on? Or maybe you're a little bit intimidated by the idea of employing highly skilled workers, in some cases that hold professional licenses. Look, maybe you're scared of the idea of your employees riding around in your expensive company vehicles with your expensive company equipment 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. There are no right or wrong answers here. But what's important is you do the work so that you can build confidence in whatever direction you decide to take and in ultimately owning your decision. Okay, the second thing you absolutely have to know is what are your financial goals and how does the money flow into the business depending on the type of franchise it is. So with financial goals, people have different goals and they define them differently, but a common one is how much cash flow is this business going to help me earn? And then there's the follow-up question. If it's a service franchise, how much territory or how many territories am I going to have to buy and service to give me a high chance of hitting my income goal, my cash flow goal? If it's a food and beverage franchise, you've got to understand how many locations, how many stores you're going to need to buy to hit that goal. And you need to understand the investment ranges for each option and then compare them. Now, maybe you're somebody who wants a business where the money comes in daily and in the form of fairly simple, small dollar transaction. If that's true, then there are plenty of options in food and beverage franchising. Think acai bowls, burgers, fries, wraps, quick service restaurants. But if you're somebody who is okay with money coming in bigger chunks, but maybe more infrequently, then you might want to look at something project-based in franchising, like home renovations or closet organization installs, or a franchise that installs outdoor lighting. Or you might be somebody who wants a business where your customers are more predictable and the revenue comes in predictably. If that's true, then something in services like mosquito control or lawn care or commercial cleaning could fit the bill. Remember, there's no wrong answer here. It all comes down to which option appeals to you the most. But whichever one does, make a note of it, write it down. Third thing you need to know is your budget. Now you're probably saying, okay, Ryan, that makes sense. I'm on board with that advice. Or you might be saying that is blindingly obvious advice. And if that is the case, fantastic. I hope it is. Because in 8 years of helping people buy franchises, I've talked to a lot of buyers who don't put the time into coming up with a budget. And that's a great way to spin your wheels and huff and puff and blow yourself out. Get frustrated and give up on your search. Well, if you think about major purchases and investments you've made over the last 5 to 15 years, you probably took the time to come up with a budget. And you did it because you didn't want to throw your time away going down a rabbit hole of options that didn't make any sense. If it was the car, you probably didn't spend all of your time looking online and test driving options that maybe would have been a lot of fun to drive, but just weren't feasible based on what you could afford. With your house, I doubt you spent a lot of time looking at and going to see houses in neighborhoods that exceeded your budget. And in that way, buying a franchise is similar. Well, how do you come up with your budget? If you are still in a position where you're trying to decide between these two huge categories in franchising, the food and beverage and the services, then the number one thing I recommend you do to save yourself time and bring focus to your search is go talk to a small business funding company. Now, who are they? What do they do? These are companies that in some cases, by the way, have been around for decades. They help buyers of businesses, independent and franchise, come up with their budget, number one. And number two, figure out based on that budget, what's the right mix of funding options for your business? Now, it could be SBA loans, it could be a retirement account rollover, maybe it's an unsecured loan, maybe it's equipment leasing. But funding companies work with all of these solutions. And number two, because some of these companies have been around so long and helped lots and lots, thousands of buyers buy businesses, get the funding for that, they see what people are buying. And Ask them the question, what are you seeing people buy over the last 3 years? They'll tell you. And their answer might help you decide to eliminate categories of franchises, which is only going to save you time. Now, after you talk to the funding company, you have to make another decision. And that is, okay, based on my budget, what can I afford? Versus what's an amount that's not going to keep me up at night. Because remember, when you're running your franchise, you're going to have plenty else to think about and focus on. So I recommend going with option two, the amount that's not going to keep you up at night. And that might be a lot less than what you can invest for a franchise. And then once you've determined that, pull out your financial goals again, what we talked about in step two, and compare that with your budget. If you're looking at food and beverage, okay, how many units am I going to have to buy realistically to hit my income goals, my financial goals? If it's services, how much territory or how big a territory and how many vehicles and how much equipment am I going to have to buy realistically to hit my financial goals? Look, you're only going to get a good result if you do this. Either you'll be pleasantly surprised because the range of options is even bigger than you thought, or you will have eliminated a huge category of franchises that exceed your budget, and you'll have saved time and you'll know where to start your search. What's your ideal location? That's number 4. And for this one that you need to know, I think it turns on knowing the answer to 3 different questions. Number 1, are you comfortable with the idea of signing a commercial lease? If you are, number 2, what sort of commercial real estate are you comfortable with? There's different classes of it at different cost levels. Retail, for example, tends to be pretty expensive. Number 3, know the answer to how important is it to you to get open fast, to start serving your customers fast and bringing in revenue as quickly as possible. If you sign a lease and you're doing the build out on Class A retail space, it's probably going to take longer for you than if you launch from home office. Now, in services, outside of fitness, gyms, childcare centers that require prime real estate tends to be pretty expensive, there's a whole world of service franchises that you can launch fairly quickly at home, or you have to sign a lease from a light commercial space, which tends to be less expensive. If you're looking at food and beverage, if you want to go down that road, there are more franchises than ever that are allowing flexible operating models, not tied to a specific location. Think food trucks, think carts that you can hook to a trailer and take to events, festivals. That can be an exciting space. So if you want to go down the food and beverage path and you don't want to sign a lease, spend your time there. You might find something that you absolutely fall in love with. Number 5 is employees. This is a big one. And how do you feel, by the way, about the idea of relying on other people, somebody else, and yes, they would work for you, but other people to help you earn a living? That is a big question. I hope you're thinking about that. Or I hope you will think about that. And maybe I should have started with this at number 1 because everybody's talking about it. Whether it's food and beverage or services, all the different categories, if you ask the franchises or the people like me who help shepherd folks through the selection process, the number 1 or number 2 question on anybody's mind who's trying to buy a franchise, and it has been for years, is how many employees do I have to have? Now, if you're going to be in business, are you okay with employees? Do you want a business that doesn't have any? There's not a lot of them in food and beverage or in the service space, but there's one that people kind of know about. It's called Fibrenew. It's a franchise where you restore plastic and vinyl and leather surfaces. As a one-man band, you can actually make a pretty good living doing that. But I find the people that I've worked with over the years, they are generally looking at industries and they have expectations of solid 6-figure income. So they're not looking at the one-man band franchise. And so if you are going to have employees, which is most likely, then who are they going to be? Are they going to be full-time? Are they going to be part-time employees? Are they going to be an unskilled workforce where you churn through a lot of employees and the faces are always changing? Or are these going to be professionals, highly skilled, licensed professionals, plumbers, electricians, HVAC techs? Would you be comfortable managing those folks? Important to ask yourself. How many employees ultimately are you going to need realistically to hit the financial goals that you've come up with? And when you start talking to specific franchises, you'll learn more about their financials and you can kind of model it out and get an estimate of it. But with a food franchise and a beverage franchise, you can count on relying on other people to prepare those items. And I'm telling you, folks that are looking at franchises, they want to be able to make at least a six-figure compensation as the owner. And so they realize they're going to have to own multiple locations of a food and beverage franchise. And that means more employees. So, and that's because the margins are generally lower in food and beverage than in services. So that's an important consideration in weighing the food and beverage space and the services space. If you are interested in food, by the way, I recommend doing this, or a retail location franchise, is see if you can go visit a location near you. Stop in, see if you can talk to the owner and see how many employees they have and how those employees interact and what they do. That would be some invaluable due diligence, and maybe it gets you a little wary of food and beverage, multiplying the number in your head by how many stores you might need, or maybe you get really excited about it. You say, yeah, this is something I can do. So think about employees, because I know you are anyway, but keep thinking about it. It's a big decision. The number 6 thing that you absolutely need to know is about the ideal owner's background. And I don't mean ideal franchise owner generally. I mean the ideal franchise owner in a particular franchise. And if you're Googling franchises, you're probably finding information on their website about minimum qualifications, financial, maybe there's some stuff in there about who they'll take. But what you want is the ideal franchisee's background. These are the franchisees making the most money, having the most fun, doing it both ways. That's only information that you're really going to get, or it's going to resonate with you when you're talking to a franchise and you're talking to their franchisees. But I can tell you that many of certainly the household names, the national brands for food and beverage franchises, even the regionally strong franchises, the ones that everybody sees, they advertise, they throw a lot of money behind that. They have developed systems. They have rigorous acceptance criteria, and it's usually only people who come from a food and service or food management background that they'll bring in. Now, there are plenty of food and beverage franchises that don't make that a requirement. They'll say, yeah, we'll take you if you don't have that. But if you were to ask the franchise, and when you do ask the franchise about who their ideal background is based on how their franchisees are doing, they're going to tell you that it's food service. And so what you need to know, what you have to get comfortable with, is knowing that that is one of the top bullet points in food and beverage for typically successful owners. Are you comfortable going into a franchise where it might be optional, but talking to the franchise is going to reveal that their top performers have it? I'm not saying there isn't variety. There's tremendous variety of owners' backgrounds by franchise and services, but you don't really see that one experience item, that one industry experience item in services at almost that universal rate that you do in food and beverage. So, you should know that, and you'll feel some sort of way about it. Maybe it helps keep the pool open for you. Maybe it helps you eliminate one side or the other. So again, something to think about. We need to talk about business interruption at number 7, the possibility that it can happen. And if it does, how are different types of businesses treated, and how are they treated differently? And we have to talk about this. Over the last 25 years or so, we've all seen how events can wreak havoc on businesses being able to remain profitable or even stay open. And every single business in every industry, whether it sells products or services, every business is at risk of interruption. My business has unique interruption risks, but I'm talking about the kind of interruption caused by an emergency, a local emergency. And so before you commit the finite time that you have to looking at businesses in food and beverage or looking in services, what you need to know is, how easy is it for you to get to your customer, to reach your customer? Your business, is it going to be the kind that goes to the customer, like an electrical repair business? You got to go to your customer. Or is it the kind of business where you're pretty much relying on your customer to come to you, like a coffee franchise or a smoothie franchise? And another question I hope you'll ask is, do you want a business that sells services, that sells essentials, like a business that sends a caregiver to a senior citizen's home and they're not going to be able to make it through the day safely maybe without that happening? Or a business that solves a really serious problem like leaking pipes for a customer, and they're counting on you to make that problem go away. And then there are the emergencies where local governments will divide businesses into essential versus non-essential categories. We've seen that happen over the last few years. And you might say, well, there's business interruption insurance. I can purchase that and it will cover me. It might, depending on the risk. But after the 2022-2023 SARS virus outbreak, you might remember that insurance carriers carriers started excluding things like coverage for viruses, pandemics, outbreaks from business insurance policies. And to this date, I think it's only 8 states have introduced legislation to restore that coverage. But what if you don't live in one of those states? Or if you live in one of those states, what happens if legislature doesn't pass the legislation? What are you going to do? And so the thing to know here is, look, we don't have a crystal ball. We can't know all of the possible emergency scenarios. The thing to know is, what are you more comfortable with? A business that's more likely to be deemed essential and one that brings your product or service to your customer, or one that might be deemed non-essential and you're requiring your customer to come to you to generate the revenue? Okay, we're nearly done. Exit strategy is number 8. What you absolutely need to know about exit strategy, though, is what are your options going to be for selling your business? A time is eventually going to come where you're going to walk away and you're going to want to do something else. It would be helpful to know what you might be able to sell this business for. Maybe it's going to be part of your retirement. Maybe you're going to want to sell your first successful franchise after having a great experience and use that money to buy another business. And if you are buying a business, I have to believe that you're a planner. Maybe you're somebody who likes to start with the end in mind. Anything that you do big, maybe you look into the future as to how it's going to turn out, and you like to work backward. That's how you develop your plan. And if you're still trying to figure out whether you go food and beverage or services, do this. To get an idea of what different types of businesses are sold for, go to this website. It's called bizbuysell.com. That website is the largest listing website. It has the most listings of existing businesses for sale in this country. You can search for businesses for sale in your state. You can search by the amount they're listed for. You can search by industries. And in the search criteria, you can look at businesses by whether they're retail. You can see businesses by whether they are service, by whether they are restaurant, and you can see what they're listed for. This could give you an idea of what your business might sell for. And it would also be helpful to understand how a business is valued when it's listed to be sold. When you do that, you're going to work with a business broker. And so I recommend going to a business broker's website. I like Morgan & Westfield's website. They're a business brokerage. On their website, they have thorough breakdown. Very easy to follow, by the way, but they have a breakdown as to how a small business is traditionally valued. So spend some time on BizBuySell, spend some time on any business brokerage website, and that'll give you a pretty firm understanding of what you might be able to list your business for, depending on what industry it's in, depending on whether it's food and beverage or in the service space. The thing to know at number 9 is the answer to a simple but existential question. And the question is, this franchise that you're thinking about buying, or maybe it's a franchise you're just thinking about, well, you're just having a look at, you're just starting to look at. Is it the kind of business that the franchise system that you join, if it failed and went away for any reason, is it still the kind of business? And is it still in the kind of industry that you could run that business if you had to as an independent owner and make a great living doing it? I don't know how many people who are starting a franchise search ask themselves that question. And I don't know how many people who are neck deep and on their way to joining a franchise. They're getting toward the finish line. It's getting real for them. I don't know whether they ask themselves that question either, but I hope you will. Because on your journey to buying a franchise, you might have decided that you were going to be a long-term successful business owner, as long as it's within your control, for 10 years, for 15 years, for 20 years, if you can. You're not going to let anything get in the way. Well, if that is you, then run this scenario. You're going to learn a lot as a franchise owner in marketing, operations, sales, customer service, recruiting and hiring employees. If the franchise were to go away 4 or 5 years after you join, with all that you know and learned and all the skills you've developed, could you still make a good go of it as an independent owner? And you got to consider 2 factors to answer this. What would your customers be paying you for? Why are they coming to your business? Why is your revenue coming from them? Products, services. What extent do you have to rely on the franchise system to get that stuff? Could you, if the franchise system went away in the future, could you source that stuff from some other place? And if you could, would it be logistically and financially feasible to do it? Or is it the kind of franchise that provides, pretty common products or services where you see a lot of, small and medium-sized business owners, even large business owners out there running those kinds of businesses? Is it a franchise that doesn't rely on something specific from the franchise system to keep the business running? Now, you might think this is kind of a strange question from me, a guy who helps people buy the right franchise, pick the right franchise. But I don't think it's so crazy. I think what's most important is that if you're going to be a food and beverage franchisee, you be a successful owner. If you're going to be a services franchisee, that you be a successful owner. Or even if there's no franchise at all, even if you decide to be an independent owner, those things are the most important things. All right, we made it. The number 10 thing you absolutely need to know if you're food and beverage, services, well, it's the answer to two really important questions I asked earlier. And those are number one, what do you want to get out of business ownership? What is most important to you? And the other question is, in doing that, what are you willing to put up with? And what do you want to stay away from? What do you want no part of? Please, in your search, looking at franchises, answer those two questions. Thanks so much for joining me. This is my first series. I've never done one of these before. And so I would love your constructive criticism and your feedback. I take notes. So leave me some comments if you would. And I know this was a lot of material. If you have any questions about anything in here, if you need a specific example about anything, just send me an email and I'll write you back. Thanks a lot. Until next time, stay hungry and stay focused.